welcome to the Any Given Saturday College Football Podcast. Because as all you guys may know, in this beautiful game that is college football, anything can happen on any given Saturday. Just ask any team that is a 30, 35, or even a 40-point favorite, and they end up not only not covering but end up losing outright. So that's why I always say any given Saturday, man, because anything can happen on any given Saturday in college football. And guys, not only welcome to this podcast, this new college football podcast, but the very first Any Given Saturday podcast in the history of this channel. So if you guys are tuning in and you guys subscribe before even the first podcast is up on the YouTube platform, up on Spotify, up anywhere, I truly do appreciate that from the bottom of my heart, because at the end of the day, what I want this college football podcast to be all about is I want to be about the people, man. I have my own ideas. I have my own opinions that I am going to go ahead and bring to the table. But, I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your opinions, stuff that you guys want me to talk about in the future. I want this podcast to be directed in the direction of you guys. What do you guys want to hear? I'll have my own things to bring to the table, but you guys are more than welcome to that table, to that discussion as well. We don't want to be gatekeeping around here. And again, like I said before, if you're listening to the very first time, if you subscribe to the channel before even the first podcast is up, again, I really do appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. So that being said, we have quite a bit to cover in this very first podcast that we have, because we may be a little more than a month out before Notre Dame and Navy officially kick off our college football season, started out not only here in the United States, but going all across the Atlantic Ocean, and going to be kicking it off live from Dublin, Ireland. That's when that first college football game is going to be started. I believe it's August 26th, and I am recording this on July 17th. So we are a little bit more than a month out, but as you guys have seen through the spring and through the summer, that O word that gets thrown around quite a bit whenever a certain sport is not in season, I don't think that really exists. I don't think that's necessarily a thing, because there always is plenty to talk about as well. So got a lot to cover in this first podcast. We got plenty planned for you guys here tonight. We have some questions from some of you OG supporters, some of you that did subscribe to this podcast before we even are up on the YouTube platform, even on Spotify. And not only that, I will also give my early predictions on who I think is going to win each conference championship at the Power 5 level, who I think is going to win each of those conferences, as I do think we are going to be in the last year of that Power 5 labeling. I'll get into that later on in this particular podcast. But first, I know some of you guys have not been living under a rock, but just in case you are, I'm sure you guys have heard Friday night, and future me editing this is your starting point. That'll make sense as you guys see more videos out on the table, on the channel. We got the NCAA. They came out with some news in terms of the findings of the NCAA investigation of the Tennessee football program. Now, the reason why Tennessee football was being investigated is not anything that Josh Heupel has been doing at the University of Tennessee since when he took over in the year 2021. He'll be entering his third year himself, but is under the previous regime, Jeremy Pruitt. He was the previous coach of Tennessee, and he was being investigated for some things that happened in 2019 and 2020. And the NCAA, they did come out and they did mention what they found out through their investigation. And also, we found out at the same time what is the punishment for Tennessee. So we'll go ahead and get into that. What we ended up finding from that NCAA investigation, and this is straight from the NCAA website itself. This is where it was posted. It was on July 14th. And any article that I cite, any source that I cite, I will have linked in the description of each YouTube video so that you guys know that the information that I'm pulling out of, I'm not just pulling it out of my butt. I'm going to do my research when I can, and to give you guys the opportunity as well to read from what I'm reading from. And obviously, I'm not going to read from the NCAA article word for word because you guys would tune out within the first 5 to 10 seconds anyways. But the NCAA concluded its investigation. And during the 3 seasons that but Jeremy Pruitt was the head coach of the Tennessee football program, they have committed 200 individual infractions, including 18 of which that were level 1 violations. And those violations come from recruiting rules violations as well as direct payments to prospects. Now, looking over this allegations further, I'm looking through the example now. One of them is which, a prospect was specifically paid in the means of up to $6,000 in order to go and guarantee the recruitment of a particular high caliber athlete. Obviously, that is still a no-no, even with the standards of NIL coming into effect not too long ago, just a couple of years ago when NIL did go into effect in 2021. But for the second example that the NCAA gave, if you really think about it, it wouldn't be something that I think Tennessee would be punished for under the current NIL rules. And the reason why I say it like that is, so this particular prospect that the NCAA itself did end up citing in their report under Prospect 2. This is a guy that did end up committing to the University of Tennessee. Dude was accompanied by his mom and his sister when, he was moving onto campus for the first time. And I guess, the mom was talking to the head coach about a medical procedure that she really wanted to get, but couldn't because of the outstanding medical debt. And before they left from Knoxville after they got the kid moved in, the head coach allegedly handed her an envelope approximately with $3,000 in cash, which the mother used to pay for medical bills. Now, why I say that under the current NIL rules, if you really think about it, they probably wouldn't be punished for that today, is whether it comes from the head coach or whether it comes from a donor for somebody's business in the Knoxville community. Those NIL deals happen all the time where, student athletes are sponsored by a local community, whether it's from a donor, maybe a university collective. So the second example, in my opinion, I don't think they would have been punished for that, but this did happen pre-NIL. So anyways, doesn't change the fact that there is punishments that were handed out, and I'm not going to read all of the penalties that Tennessee was enforced, because there's actually quite a bit in here in this NCAA article. But basically what you really need to know is, to some, it's going to seem like a slap on the wrist. They're not going to be banned from going to a bowl game in the next couple of years or anything like that. They're actually not necessarily losing too many scholarships either. They are going to be seeing a reduction in football scholarships. They're going to lose a total of 28 scholarships during the term of probation, including at least 2 scholarships each year. And that probation period is 5 years long as well. So you're really talking about losing 5 to 6 scholarships a year. So while Tennessee will be put at a slight disadvantage in recruiting, instead of having that full 25 scholarships that each school at the higher end of Division I football will be allotted every year, Tennessee is going to be working with 19 to 20 scholarships over the next 5 years. So it's going to be more important for the University of Tennessee to identify who they want to get and make sure that they develop those players that they do already have on the roster. That's going to become more evident over the next 4 to 5 years while they are under probation. Again, they are not going to be banned from going to a bowl game. So at least they won't have to do that. They did, however, have to pay a fine of $8 million. It was an $8 million fine, and that $8 million fine that came from the ESPN article that came out the day that the sanctions were announced. This was going to be basically to make up for what they would be projected to make if they were to miss the postseason due to a bowl ban for this upcoming season and then in the 2024 season. That's what that would do. So I was on Twitter. I saw some of the reactions to this. And by the way, Jeremy Pruitt did end up getting a 6-year show clause as well. So he cannot be employed at any NCAA institution during that show cause. And even if he gets hired during this time, he will be suspended for the entirety of his first year of his employment as well. So there's that. And not only did that happen to them, but Tennessee was not great under Jeremy Pruitt before the wins were ultimately vacated. It was not a great tenure at the University of Tennessee. They ended up going 16-19 from 2018 to 2020, 2020 being that COVID year. That does include 10-16 in conference play. 2019 being the highlight where before the vacated wins, they went 8-5. They did also win the Gator Bowl, but the one punishment that to me makes absolutely no sense, and I hate that the NCAA does this, and I know, we as a country, we come with a lot of diverse ideas, and we don't have a consensus agreement on a lot of things, but I'm sure a lot of us that are actually college football fans, I think we can agree that vacating wins is really stupid. I'm sorry. It is just stupid that they end up vacating these wins from the University of Tennessee, right? So for those of you that are a little bit older, I know that some of you are aware of the Men in Black movies. They have a stick that they can use to wipe someone's memory. It could be set for either something short-term or something long-term, but that stick can be whipped out at any given point by any of the Men in Black agents, and it can remove somebody's temporary memory to forget what just happened right before their eyes if something really out of pocket happens in the heat of the moment, right? So Tennessee, they had 11 of their 16 wins from 2018 to 2020 vacated. The 2018 record still going to stand at 5-7, but the 8 wins in 2019 and the 2020 record as well, their 3 wins in that all-conference schedule, that's all going to remain as well. That's going to be vacated. But here's the thing, though. That magic stick in Men in Black does not exist in real life. Did we not watch the games happen on the field? Like, what are we doing? And it's not like Tennessee heavily benefited. I mean, I talked about Jeremy Pruitt's record. It's not like they were doing a lot of winning. They were never at the same level that current head coach Josh Heupel has them right now, where they're till late in the season where they got dropped by Georgia. That score might have looked close, but Georgia was in control the entire time. That's a story for a different time, but I'm just saying, Josh Heupel's got Tennessee winning a little bit more than what Jeremy Pruitt has. And like I said, some of you guys may be looking at these notable punishments and saying, oh, well, Jake, they slapped them on the wrist. Well, here's the thing. Tennessee did self-report. They didn't wait for the NCAA to come banging on their door before they start cooperating with said entity. And now that we have NIL in place, now that the NCAA is allowing, well, they were forced to change on the NIL front, but that's a story for a different time. But on the NIL front, what the NCAA is around it, I think this is going to be the way moving forward, where instead of seeing these bowl bans, we'll still see a reduction in scholarships if there's any infractions going forward, but I think we're going to see fines, hurt them in the checkbook. I think that's, more than fair. And more importantly, that doesn't hurt the current players that are in the program. Like, why should the players on the current roster, as well as the current coaching staff, be punished for something that happened with a previous coaching staff? And going back to maybe some of those players that did benefit of getting money under the table, well, all things considered, most of those players are gone, if not all of them. The Tennessee roster of today's players that are going to be taking the field come September for the Tennessee Volunteers, it's a lot different than the 2020 Tennessee team that took the field. It's a completely different cast of players. So it might be, some people are not going to be happy with the sanctions that Tennessee received from the NCAA, but I think that this was fair, and I'm the first person to go out and really, what's the word? Really criticize the NCAA, right? So that's really what it barrels down to. But speaking of that NIL, though, this is a new starting point. Some of you guys did send me some questions and wanted to, hear my thoughts in regards to what I thought was going to happen for a couple of things that are happening. You guys sent me some pretty good questions, those of you that are OGs to this particular channel, and I really again do appreciate that from the very bottom of my heart. I truly do. It really does mean a lot to me. But some of you guys did ask me one of you guys asked me when we were going into the idea. Wow, you guys asked me about what I felt about NIL. And I got a really good question on NIL where I was specifically asked, what are my thoughts on NIL? What did I think about that just across college football? And that's from Sportscast Radio 8658. And here's what I felt about NIL since it originally did come into effect. I do think that long term, I really do think that NIL is going to help in the long run in terms of creating parity in college sports. I really do think so, especially when you get to the point where coaches do have a good idea of how to utilize NIL. We are already seeing that at places like Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a perfect example of what can happen when you do end up seeing NIL being utilized properly. They got a nice football team out there at Ole Miss. They could make some noise there in the SEC. They got some questions that they need to answer, but Lane Kiffin's doing a very good job. He's a front runner, an innovator when it comes to utilizing the NIL. And we also, when you're looking around the country as well, NIL is certainly going to affect teams that if they have the right coach in place, and it's particularly a coach that knows what they're doing with NIL, how to utilize that, they're going to really be able to benefit. And I think it's going to challenge some of the traditional blue buds, challenge the Alabamas of the world, challenge the Ohio States of the world as well. Because let's say your university is at a major city. There's a lot of resources in those major cities, a lot of people, and certainly a lot of alumni maybe in those areas that would really like to see their hometown college teams be successful. I mean, just going across the continental United States for just a few examples, starting on the West Coast, starting with the obvious. I mean, LA, you got Hollywood, you got Beverly Hills, you got all the bright lights that LA provides. USC and UCLA, they're going to benefit heavily from that. San Diego is another example of that. San Diego State, if they do get into the Power Five, which I think they were exploring that this year. They're ultimately going to stay in the Mountain West for right now, even for smaller programs out in the West Coast. I mean, San Jose, it's not too far from San Francisco, and San Jose, decent sized town itself, pretty big sized city. I think that could really help a San Jose State of the world. I think you could help Washington out in Seattle, Nevada. I mean, Las Vegas. I mean, with all those casinos, the gambling capital of the world, you think UNLV won't get a piece of that if they choose to accept that? And there's just countless examples like that across the country. You know, Houston, Texas. Houston just joined the Power Five. They've been preparing for years for this opportunity, keeping it going around the country. Teams like LSU, teams like, say, a Columbus. Columbus is not a small town either. Ohio State is up there. New York, Rutgers is the closest team that plays major Division I football that is the closest to New York City. You think the financial capital of the world, you think there isn't any interest of Rutgers being good out there in any college sports? Same thing with Boston College. Boston's a pretty big sports town as well, major market. Same thing going down to the southeast. Orlando, Tampa, Miami, the Hurricanes. So countless examples of maybe programs that are not making a ton of noise right now, haven't been to a college football playoff or haven't won a national championship in the college football playoff era. But I think they can make a lot of noise. And I think long term, there could be some parity created in the higher echelons of Division I college football, because we're already seeing it if you think about it in college basketball. I know it's a college football podcast, but in college basketball, we are already seeing that as well. We just witnessed San Diego State make it to the national championship. Florida Atlantic, who was in Conference USA for moving up to the American, but Florida Atlantic, of all teams, was in the Final Four. So we're already seeing that parity happen in college basketball. So I wouldn't be shocked to see that in college football as well. And personally, it wouldn't be such a bad thing, especially if we can figure out NIL, because we're only a couple years in. If you really think about it, we're only a couple years in the NIL era. So we really won't know the full ramifications of what NIL is going to have on college athletics, because you really need to be 5 to 10 years into something before you get a full long-term picture on what kind of long-term effects it's going to have on college football. But in my opinion, I feel like that's the direction where it could go. I think it could help college football in the long run. And something that's going to really shock you guys as well, I was looking at it at the high school level as well. There are already 32 states. Yes, you heard that correctly. 32 states that have laws that permit the allowing of high school student athletes to profit from NIL. So if you think it's a kind of controversial thing at the college level, it's not a matter of if that will trickle down to high school athletics. It's already happening in many states at the high school level. Even my home state of Ohio is having it under consideration right now. So NIL is not going anywhere anytime soon, but I think that as long as it's properly regulated, I think that's the big thing. You have to regulate it properly, but there's nothing wrong with a college athlete getting the opportunity to make a name off himself, because many of these college athletes, even college athletes that maybe be stars at the college level, they might not be able to do much at the professional level, or maybe have an injury cut their sport career short. So it's a very short shelf life being an athlete at the college or the pro level. I think these athletes should be able to get that opportunity to make a name for himself, just an opportunity to maybe take care of their folks back at home that maybe are relying on them, trying to get out of poverty. But I do think NIL is going to help college football in the long term, especially in terms of that parity. And speaking of that parody, though, I got another question from you guys. You guys asked me, one of the OGs of this podcast. This is from Justin Dees, by the way. Asking about super conferences and how it could affect the sport. Well, Justin, I really do appreciate that. And I think it really depends on how you view the conference realignment. Now, it's not happening this year, but it's going to become into effect next year. We know that Texas and Oklahoma is going to the SEC. We also know that UCLA and USC, they're leaving the Pac-12 and they are going to the Big Ten. So for the first time, we will see two 16-team conferences. And for those of you that maybe play NCAA 14, utilize that college football revamp as well, we're getting to the point where there's legitimately too many teams in the conference to get everybody in the conference in a game, right? So that's where we're starting to get to. But all things considered, though, I think for me, it just really depends on the move itself, right? Like I look at it at a case by case basis, right? I'm not saying that it's going to be generally bad or generally good for the sport, because even this year we do have plenty of college realignments happening. Most notably, we have Cincinnati, UCF, BYU, and Houston. They are all leaving. Well, most of them are leaving the American Conference. BYU is an exception. They were an independent. They're all joining the ranks of the Big 12. So for this year, the Big 12 will have 14 teams. You also have teams like Rice, Charlotte, Florida Atlantic as well. Those teams are filtering in from Conference USA. And I think North Texas is also getting in there as well. They're now an American Conference team. And then Conference USA, they're just trying their best to survive. They pulled up a couple of teams from the FCS level. They also got New Mexico State and Liberty as well. So the Conference USA of this past season did get cannibalized. But like I said, I think it really just depends on a case-by-case basis, right? So the SEC, I didn't mind nearly as much. Yes, I always view Texas and Oklahoma as Big 12 schools, and I'm a big fan of tradition. I'm always going to be a traditionalist at the end of the day, with a few exceptions here or there. But if you want to like get it on a scale, I'm not like an extreme traditionalist, but lean towards being a traditionalist and having college football being regionalized, right? Kind of that particular path. And here's my thing about this, right? So the SEC added Oklahoma and Texas. And at least for Oklahoma and Texas are in the same footprint as the SEC. Texas, not the first team from Texas joined the SEC. Texas A&M is already in there as well. And looking at, bordering states, you also have Arkansas in the area, and LSU is in the area as well. Oklahoma, not too far from Texas. So the Red River rivalry is still going to live on, even as these two teams transition from the Big 12 over to the SEC conference. But the Big 10, though, I know why they did it, but that don't mean I gotta like it, right? So UCLA and USC joined the Big 10. I know why they did it. It's for the money. The Big 10, they signed an extremely lucrative TV deal, one that is going to pay each school like $50 million a year for each Big 10 school. So from a financial standpoint, and I'm a financial guy myself, I get it, but I think it's going to have a negative impact, not only on the regionality of college football, but also, what's going to happen to these other sports? Now, football and basketball, I'm sure they're going to get their flights to be able to fly back and forth from each of the traditional Big Ten schools. So it's not as hard for them to get to, say, Rutgers or to Ohio State or to a Penn State. But What about the non-revenue sports? What about your cross countries and track and field? What about your volleyballs of the world? Are they going to get those same luxuries? And not to mention, at the end of the day, these are still student athletes. Most of them will not be going to the professional ranks, right? Very small percentage gets to enjoy any level of professional athletics after their college career does go to an end. That's still an insane amount of travel time. And it's not even guaranteed that these schools will provide flights to the farther out Big Ten schools. So, that's L for the logistics and to the regionality of college football, especially in the western part of the country. Just losing a lot of tradition there. I'm not a fan. I don't like that particularly, but for me, as long as it makes geographical sense, do go off, King. That's really what it barrels down to. Will the SEC and the Big Ten be the only two super conferences that we see? I don't know. Only time will tell, because last year when there was rumors of USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten, I thought that it would never happen. I didn't believe it, but yet here we are a year later, and in less than 365 days, they will officially become members of the Big Ten. So, what do I know, right? What do I know? We'll have to wait and see what happens to the Big 12, by the way, because if there's a third super conference, it might be the Big 12, but I think this is the last year that we can have that Power 5 terminology. We're going to need to split up that quote-unquote Power 5 a little bit. I don't know what lingo to use to differentiate between, the Big 10 and the SEC, and then the other three power conferences in the Big 12, ACC, and the Pac-12 as well. You need to think of some terminology, because I think the Power 5, that's not going to really apply anymore after we do get into the following college football season. So let me know in the comments if you have any ideas of what we should do to really differentiate that. But yeah, that's really how I feel about these realignment in college football and essentially creating these super conferences. Speaking of those conferences, and I'm going to take a quick little drink, get some water. It's tough out here if you're not hydrating. I got a question as well, continuing to dive into the mailbag here from VW Productions, asking about the thoughts on the incoming Pac-12 media deal. I know that's a big deal out on the West Coast. So we just talked about USC and UCLA leaving the Pac-12 and going to the Big Ten as well. So as of right now, as of the recording of this video, there has not been any announcement made in terms of a new media deal being made with any entity. But what I have seen from the internet, again, nothing's been confirmed, but in the ballpark, we're really looking at, so we're looking at, as of right now, it's going to be in the range of $30 to $35 million, so which is about the ballpark of what the Big 12 signed for its most recent media deal. And I don't have the same concerns for the Big 12, right? Because what we just witnessed last football season, even without Oklahoma, even without Texas, the Big 12 conference is still capable of going to the college football playoff. Not only go to the college football playoff, but winning college football playoff games. We saw TCU make it to the college football playoff and doing it without even winning their conference championship. Remember, TCU did not win their conference last year. Kansas State actually won their conference championship game for the Big 12. TCU was there, but that was their only loss in the quote-unquote regular season. Prior to the college football playoff, they still made it in spite of that. So, and I don't have any concerns about the Big 12. So that's why I feel that way about the Big 12. But going to the Pac-12, my concern isn't with the media deal, because especially if the media deal is going to be around what the Big 12 is going to get. My concern with the Big 12 or with the Pac-12, I should say, is what's going to happen to that conference because they're losing two very big powers. Well, USC being a big one, and then UCLA. They're losing the LA market. They're going to lose a lot of presence in California, which is a huge pipeline for talent for high school athletes. California, Texas, Florida, no particular order. That's the top three in terms of getting that quality talent, the best talent in the country. That's where most of it comes from. Losing USC and UCLA from that standpoint, that's a big loss for the Pac-12. And if this conference is going to survive, the other members are going to have to step up because right now the only Pac-12 team that made it to the college football playoff in the current 4-team era was Oregon. I think they did make it twice, once in 2013 and then another time in 2014. Pretty sure that's the only Pac-12 team. Now, does Oregon get back with Bo Nix? Does Oregon State make a leap and surprise a lot of people? What about Utah and Washington's? Even without USC and UCLA, there's still viable programs out there, but are they going to reach a point where they would be legitimately considered for a 4-team playoff? Now, luckily, the Pac-12 will be bailed out as we are going to expand to a 12-team playoff. And as of right now, top 6 conference champions, the 6 best ranked teams that did win their conference championship, they will automatically get in. But is the Pac-12 going to survive? And it's really going to be infringement of what happens to how do the other Pac-12 teams respond to the media deal? Do some other teams bolt for the, let's just say, the Big 12? Or does the Mountain West even get in there? Do they smell blood in the water? Do they get a couple of teams out there in the Pac-12 and the conference ultimately becomes like the WAC and dissolves? That's a very real possibility. And that's going to be a massive cloud that hangs over this conference. And that's a shame too, because the Pac-12 has a lot of very good football teams that are going to be playing this upcoming season. Some that are going to be very much worthy. If there's a 10 o'clock game and it features 2 Pac-12 teams, it's going to be worth the watch. It's going to be fun to see Pac-12 conference play out, but that's going to fall to the back burner, unfortunately, because of the uncertainty of the Pac-12. So, you asked me about this media deal. We'll see what it actually comes up with and who ends up getting the media rights to Pac-12 football, but certainly some cause for concern there. And hopefully for the best for the Pac-12. I hate to see conferences dissolve, but it happens to the best of us. Hopefully the Pac-12 isn't next. I did get one more question from the mailbag though, and this is from Coach Gunner talking about, like to launch the podcast and, thanks for the awesome content, which, by the way, if you're new, not only do we have a college football podcast, I do have a college football gaming channel that will also be linked in the description. But what's the opinion on all the realignment in college football? Kind of already went into that. But the other question that I wanted to add that was asked was, would you rather most conferences be based on regions and have a March Madness style tournament? Thank you for the awesome content. And Coach Gunner, thank you so much for that awesome question. So, we'll start with the first part with the most conferences being based on regions. So, with the expansion from a 4-team playoff to a 12-team playoff, if we're going to the point where we're going to have half those bids being automatics for conference championships, yeah, I would absolutely rather conferences be based on geographical regions. Now, that would be a pipe dream that only happens in a video game, considering the current climate of college sports. And money talks, man. Money really does talk. I don't have to tell you guys twice about this. Anyone that been paying attention to college football for a long time is going to tell you that But again, that being said, if we're going to the point where we are going to have automatic bids, I would prefer those conferences being based regionally. And the reason that I go in that particular direction is okay, so we're going to have these automatic bids, but we already know that there's going to be a massive gap between winning the SEC and winning, say, Conference USA. Like, it's just a whole nother level required to win Conference USA and winning the SEC, winning the Big Ten. Those conferences that are adding two more teams and becoming super conferences. But if you divide the conferences based on regions, sure, there's still going to be a gap between the best conference in the country and the worst conference in the country. Like for example, like the Southeast, even with like the Sun Belt teams and the SEC. A lot of great football is played out there in the southeastern part of the country, right? So that there's still going to be a difference between the top conference and the worst conference in the country, even if we go off of a regions base, but it wouldn't be as much of a gap. And I would be more comfortable with having automatic bids in the college football playoff if that's the route that we are going to go in order to determine a national champion. Now, for me personally, I wouldn't want to have a 12-team playoff. I think 12 teams is too much for the FBS ranks. And that also kind of goes in the second part of this question, having a March Madness style tournament. Now, this is kind of referring to the Mike Leach School of Thought, and rest in peace to Mike Leach. My prayers and condolences still to that Mississippi State community. It's tough to see someone that not only deserves to be in the College Football Hall of Fame, but is a very genuine person, pass away as suddenly as he did. But one of the points that Mike Leach did bring up in his interviews, and I think this was when he was at Washington State as well, was he's talking about the college football playoff and talking about, well, high school determines a state champion with a bracket, with a tournament. Same thing with Division 3, Division 2, Division 1 AA or FCS for those want to keep it PC and modern. But Division 1 college football, until 2013, we did not have a tournament. We had the BCS system from the late 90s to 2012. I think 2012 was the last year where we had the BCS system. Then we transitioned to a 4-team playoff. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on with these other regions, right? What's going on with Division 1, Division 2, and Division 3. So FCS, definitely more familiar with FCS. They have a 24-team tournament. They have their automatic bids, and then they have at-larges to round out the field. Same thing with Division 2. They have 32 teams, and then Division 3, also 32 teams, but they have 27 automatic bids because there's that many bids for the Division 3 level, and I'm pretty sure it's the same with Division 2 level as well, and only 5 at-larges. And if you think 32 teams sounds like a lot, they're actually thinking about expanding it to 40 teams to compete for a national championship. So FCS is doing a larger tournament than the FBS level, and that's even with the expanded 12-team playoff. Same thing with Division 2 and Division 3. But here is the big caveat of that. How much do we care about conference championship games? Because part of the reason why FCS is able to have a bigger tournament, Division 2, Division 3 of the NCAA, is that they do not have conference championship games to determine a conference champion. That only happens at the FBS level, where we see the popularity of the conference championships. And not too long ago, that wasn't a thing at the FBS level either. This was something that was instituted, that really started to pick up steam in the 90s. The SEC was actually one of the first conferences at the higher end of Division 1 to pick up a conference championship game. I believe it was between Alabama and Florida, and Alabama was just having one of their first great years following the coaching tenure of Bear Bryant, and they were in the mix of going to the national championship game. They would be in automatically if there was not a conference championship, and they were taking on Florida, led by Steve Spurrier. Really bringing it back, you guys. And it was a close game, but Alabama won. But really makes you wonder, like, what if Alabama lost that game to Steve Spurrier and the Florida Gators, and it prevents Alabama from going to the conference championship game or the national championship? Think about, I'm not going either for or against conference championships here. It's really some food for thought in terms of if we want to expand to more than 16 teams, because it's another game on the player's body. So it's an interesting thought. I personally believe that I think 8 would be perfect in terms of having a college football playoff. I've always said, even before the college football realignments, you get the best 5 champions, get each champion from each Power 5 conference. They automatically get in. You also have the best group of 5 teams, so that a UCF, who I really thought back in 2017 should have gotten a shot to at least try to compete for a national championship, at least prove it on the field, whether they actually should get the opportunity to hoist a national championship banner or not. I thought the 2020 Cincinnati team could have also gotten an opportunity. There was a lot of really good players that are now in the NFL. Alex Pierce, Kobe Bryant, Desmond Ridder, Sauce Gardner, the Sauce, that guy as well. So that was a very good Cincinnati team in the COVID year as well, that, you know, lost to Georgia on a last-second field goal to in the Peach Bowl. And that Georgia kicker needed to hit a 50-something yard field goal to win Georgia that game. Really could have gone either direction. Cincinnati really could have won that game, to the not delight of Cincinnati fans. Sorry to unpeel that Band-Aid for you guys. But that being said, also, I think that would help have a slot for group of 5. If there is a group of 5 team worthy of competing for a national championship, if there is a 27 UCF that pops up this year, or a 2020/2021 Cincinnati team, they should be given that opportunity to compete for a national championship. And because if you can go undefeated, it doesn't matter the strength of your schedule. Going undefeated is a very difficult thing to do. So if you can accomplish that and win your conference championship, you know, you should be given that opportunity. And then 2 at-larges. So if there's 2 teams that didn't win their conference, but, you know, are still really good teams, like Notre Dame, that would really help Notre Dame because they're an independent. They're not affiliated with any conference in football, or, you know, just some other team that didn't have the luxury of, maybe they had a misstep in their conference championship, or along the regular season, they lost a game or 2, but played a really tough schedule. They can still get in as well. So I think 8 is the magic number here, but obviously the folks that decide how the higher Division I national championship should be crowned, they certainly disagreed with me there. And that's going to be, for future me, that's going to be an end point on that. So I take a drink from a cup. Make sure to stay hydrated, you guys. It is so important to stay hydrated, especially in the summertime. It is hot. I know it's hot in many parts of the country, so make sure you're staying hydrated. Little health tip of the day for you guys. But now we get to the spicy part, maybe, of this show, where I give you guys my early thoughts. I know we're a month out until the first actual games do start, but want to give my thoughts here before I end up signing off here, in terms of who I would really like to see go out and compete and win the conference championships at the Power 5 level. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order. I'm going to start with the ACC and then work my way down until we get to the SEC in terms of my thoughts. So here we go. We are going to go ahead and start with the ACC. Now, the ACC, last year, we did see Clemson win the conference championship, although they were they were not represented in the college football playoff, and no ACC team was actually in the college football playoff this year. But I think the ACC can certainly be entertaining. Clemson did make some changes toward the end of the regular season. Cade Klubnik is going to be quarterbacking the Clemson Tigers. He took over for DJU Uonguye late in the season. And so it might have been like too little too late, because I think if that kid started a whole year, I think it's a different conversation whether Clemson does get into the playoff or not. But in this circumstance, that didn't happen. And they don't really embrace the transfer portal. And there's certainly going to be some good teams out there that certainly can challenge. Drake May is back for North Carolina, for example. And that was a huge win for North Carolina. It was rumored that he was going to enter the transfer portal, and that didn't happen. Drake May is back in North Carolina. They have one of the best quarterbacks in the country. They're back. Miami had a really disappointing season last year. The biggest thing I remember from Miami is that they got blown out by Mid-Tennessee State. And no disrespect to Mid-Tennessee State, but when you have the type of players that you have at Miami, that simply cannot happen. And Mario Cristobal, he's doing his best to clean up the culture issues that were at Miami under the last predecessor, trying to clean things up. We're moving on to year number 2. They should be a better team, but are they ready to go from a team that I don't think even made it to a bowl game last year to a team that's competing for the ACC? You know, we'll have to wait and see. You're going to have to take it one game at a time for sure. Florida State surprised a lot of people last year. They ended up winning 10 games. They have recruited at a high level. They even gotten some very good pickups in the transfer portal. They have worked the transfer portal extremely well over the course of the last couple of years. And Florida State, as of right now, I'm looking at their rankings live on the 247 Sports website. That's where I go to check recruiting as well as overall team talent. That's where I would go. I don't trust ESPN as much. I don't really trust On Free Sports nearly as much. But Florida State right now, this recruiting class in terms of the transfer portal, they have the number 4 transfer portal class. And then you want to talk about actual football recruiting right now. Florida is recruiting at number 11 for the 2024 class. And then in 2023, they were the number 19 class. So they put together some good classes. They also, again, recruited very well in the transfer portal. Their key contributors are back. Jordan Travis, he is back for another year. He has another year of experience in that offense. And it's going to be an interesting clash to see what's going to happen between Florida State and Clemson, because Clemson does not, and particularly Dabo Swinney, does not really embrace the transfer portal, but Florida State has. And it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen on that September 23 game between Florida State and Clemson. But even though that's a big game, for Florida State, it's not the end of the world if they lose to Clemson on that September 23 game, because the rest of the games that they have on their schedule, very winnable. Virginia Tech at home, Syracuse at home after that, Duke at home as well. They have a free game homestand after that. Really, the only other game in conference play that I could see give them issues is possibly Miami. If Miami plays better up to expectations, I don't think they're going to be Miami's going to be a realistic national contender until next season. I think Mario Cristobal is really targeting that year free. Like, Miami will be good, but I don't think they're going to be great, if that makes sense, in year number 2 of the Mario Cristobal era. But Florida State does have Miami at home. And remember, the ACC did get rid of divisions. I think I love this decision to get rid of the divisions in the ACC so that the best 2 teams, regardless of divisions, are represented in the conference championship game. I think it should be adopted across the board. Big Ten, I'm looking at you, and Big Ten we'll get to later, but looking at the schedule on screen, you want to talk about Florida State possibly going to the college football playoff. I mean, 2 games are going to be really key in the regular season. Of course, they have another neutral site game against LSU. Rematch from last year where LSU actually missed the extra points to end the game, and that's how Florida State won that. And then they'll have Clemson on the road September 23rd. That place is going to be rocking, especially if Florida State takes care of business. If they go 3-0, and they probably should go 3-0 if we're going to be on. Well, we'll see about that LSU game, but at the very least, they should be 2-1. But Florida State can either win Clemson, beat Clemson, or LSU early in the season. They're going to be in really good shape of putting themselves in a position to make it to the college football playoff for the first time since Jameis Winston was the starting quarterback of the Florida State Seminoles. It's been a minute. But with that being said, all things considered, you have Jordan Travis coming back. You've been recruiting extremely well the past couple of years. Transfer portal has been working extremely well too. Even though they might not be national championship contenders, I wouldn't go that far. I have Florida State winning this ACC this year. I think they got a good path to do it, especially with all the other games on their schedule in terms of ACC play. I think they're going to be favored in every other game that they're going to play, including that Miami game on November 11th. Give me Florida State going for the ACC crown of this upcoming season. So then I threw some shade at the Big Ten, talking about how they should get rid of divisions, and they will be doing that, not this season, but next season with USC and UCLA joining Big Ten. They are going to get rid of the divisions. So before I get into who I think is going to win the Big Ten, I'm going to say just avoid any talk of a bias or anything like that. So I am a supporter of Ohio State athletics. It's not my favorite team. My favorite team is Cincinnati because I do have immediate family that did go to the University of Cincinnati, including both of my siblings. So I am a supporter of Ohio State athletics. So when I say this, I'm not saying this from a position of being biased by any means. I really do think Michigan has what it takes to win the Big Ten for the 3rd year in a row. Now, how Michigan is going to win the Big Ten, it really comes down to 2 games, because we're going to be honest, Michigan does not have a tough schedule until we get to November. They start with Rutgers. Rutgers should be an easy win. Nebraska is rebuilding. I expect Michigan to be favored in every game through October. November, it gets very interesting because they take 2 of the 3 big dogs in the Big Ten East. And you want to talk about possibly the toughest division in college football. You have to have the Big Ten Eastern Division as the toughest division, because whoever finishes 3rd is going to be the best 3rd place team in college football, right? Because last year, Penn State went 9-3. They ended up winning 10 games. They won the Rose Bowl against Utah. So that was their 3rd place team, right? That was what the 3rd place team in that division did. Michigan saw them in the college football playoff, as did Ohio State. It's rare to see 2 teams from the same conference make it to the college football playoff. It's even more rare to see 2 teams from the same division make it into the college football playoff as well. But it's going to come down to 2 games. They're on the road November 11th at Penn State. It is a noon game, but still a very intense environment. Happy Valley is going to be loud. And then we all know about the game at the end of the season, November 25th. They host Ohio State in the game. And I thought about this long, and I really did thought about this long and hard in terms of who I thought was going to be that Big Ten champion, who I think it's going to be at this point. And I look towards Michigan because I look at Ohio State and Penn State. I think right now they both have too many questions for me. So for Ohio State, we still don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be. Could be Kyle McCord, but we don't know how Kyle McCord is going to be. He was a highly talented recruit. Don't get me wrong. Kyle McCord was extremely talented, right? Kyle McCord was somebody who, if we're going to be realistic, either like a high-end 4-star player or even a 5-star. I'll have to look into that later, but either way, highly talented recruit for Ohio State. But we haven't really seen him play, right? We've seen him start against Akron. That's the only start to my knowledge that he's had. And it's Akron, so really not much that you can really say when his only start was against Akron. We've seen him in mop-up duty. But more importantly, well, not only that, does Ohio State have enough depth on the offensive line? They lost a lot to the NFL. Multiple guys went pro, most notably Paris Johnson Jr. on that offensive line. They had arguably the best offensive line in the entire country last year. They were certainly top 5. They are certainly up there as well. And can Jim Knowles, can he make that defense have enough of a strive to be a legitimate national championship contender? They almost won a national championship, and that defense was leaky for Ohio State. But do they make enough of a stride, particularly in rush defense, particularly to stop this Michigan offense? And I'm honestly not sure. And that's, similar questions that I have with Penn State as well. We know that Drew Aller is a 5-star. We know that he has a lot of hype, and a lot of folks think that he can be better than Sean Clifford, who started at Penn State for what seemed like half a century. But I have similar questions with Penn State that I do Ohio State, and Penn State doesn't even have the same level of athletes. Like, they have a really good team, but they don't have the horses that Ohio State has. So I think Penn State could possibly compete for a conference championship, national championship next year. But I think Penn State would finish third again. Really, for Michigan, I don't really have those same questions. I'm not really concerned about anything. I think Michigan's the most complete team. JJ McCarthy, he may not be the best quarterback in the world. He's probably an above average QB, but in that Ohio State game, the first few quarters, Blake Corum was contained pretty well by the Ohio State defense. And it was JJ McCarthy that really had to go out and make some big time throws, get those massive chunk plays in order to ensure the Michigan offense can keep up with Ohio State, and he was capable of doing that. And as for what happened in the college football playoff game, well, yeah, he might have thrown a couple of interceptions, but that defense also gave up 50 points. It's not all on JJ McCarthy. So the concerns I have with Michigan isn't in the conference level, is if they take that final step to get to a national championship game and possibly win the national championship. Now, that being said, I think Ohio State could have the biggest upside, because what we have seen in the last 4 years between 2019 LSU, 2020 Alabama, and then the last 2 Georgia teams, they're all teams that had the most first-round picks in the NFL draft, and I think Ohio State could be that based on what we've seen in terms of early projections of the mock draft community. But if you want to talk about right now, you want to talk about today, I genuinely think Michigan will be hoisting that Big Ten championship trophy at the end of the year. Although I wouldn't be shocked if Ohio State won it either. If you're going to ask me today, I'm going to go with Michigan. Speaking of those big conferences, though, we now move on to the Big 12. We move into the Big 12 conference here. And Big 12 is going to be interesting. Big 12 was a very fun conference to watch this past season. Big 12, man, we didn't see Texas. We didn't see Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship. We saw TCU and Kansas State vying for that conference championship. That was what we witnessed. And odds makers in Vegas going into last season, they had TCU and Kansas State in the middle of the pack. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Texas really plays things out. But we witnessed Texas have a recalibration of expectations in the middle of the season, right? Because we saw Texas play Alabama in Austin, Texas. And what we saw was Texas lost the game, but Texas lost on the last second field goal to Alabama. And dare I say, if Quinn Ewers didn't get hurt in that game, I actually thought Texas probably beats Alabama in that game if we're being realistic. And I'll talk about Alabama a little bit later. But from that game, we saw a recalibration of expectations. And unfortunately, injuries to the quarterback positions, those recalibrated expectations, they didn't live up to that. They did not make it to the Big 12 championship game. And they didn't win, I believe it's the Alamo Bowl that they went to play Washington. They didn't beat Washington in the Alamo Bowl. I'll talk about them later as well. But Texas, if you want to talk about wide receiver cores, they might have one of the most explosive wide receiver cores in the country. I think Ohio State is number one, but Texas, I don't think Texas is too far behind. The question with Texas is, can Quinn Ewers stay healthy? And can he grow in year 2 of the Steve Sarkisian offense? And also, can Xavier Worthy reduce his drop percentage? Because Xavier Worthy is one of the most dynamic athletes in the entire country. There's no doubt about that. However, do we believe that he can focus on putting more focus on catching the football? Because 6% is one of the worst in the country. If Xavier Worthy has the ball in his hands, he's a very dynamic athlete. He can go for a big play at any moment. Schedule does fall pretty favorably for the Texas Longhorns, especially in conference play. We know about their non-conference. They'll start with Rice, and as long as they don't play with their food, they'll go 1-0. In terms of national expectations, that Alabama game on September 9th is going to tell us a lot about this Texas team, but then they close out with Wyoming. So bare minimum, they'll be 2-1. So they're on the road against Baylor. Baylor's a solid squad, could give them some trouble. They have the Oklahoma and the Red River rivalry. That's a neutral site game. On the road versus Houston, home versus BYU. And then they have Kansas State and TCU. TCU, I definitely don't believe is going to be the same team as last year. The biggest challenge I think that they'll have in the Big 12 Conference is their last game, November 24th. So November 24th is home against Texas Tech. They got a really darn good offense out there in Texas Tech. They're bringing a lot of their production back as well. So if anyone prevents them from going to the conference championship, it could be Texas Tech. But again, they're not on that divisional format. So just two best teams straight up will go to the conference championship. Regardless of where they are in the conference geographically, they'll be there. So I do think for Texas, not saying that they go out and win a national championship here, but I do think that you want to talk about winning the Big 12. I think Texas finally gets the job done. They haven't done it since 2009, but just because you haven't done something in a while doesn't mean you can't do it. I think Texas, for the first time in 14 to 15 years, a high school age kid, mind you, they're going to win the Big 12, and that will be Texas' last Big 12 championship title because they are, of course, leaving for the SEC. I don't think Oklahoma is not. They'll be better than 6 and 7, but I don't think they're going to compete. And I think this is Texas' years to shine. I truly believe so. The Pac-12, however, is a very interesting story. Now, I was on FanDuel. That's the sporting app that I go to for like team-related bets. I was looking at the over-under totals for win totals. There's 12 teams in the Pac-12 conference. Half of them, you heard that right, half of them have an over-under of 8.5 wins. Let that sink in for a second. 12 teams in the Pac-12, and 6 of them have an over-under of 8.5 wins. USC, Washington, Oregon, and Oregon State. And of course, there's Utah and UCLA as well. So when I told you guys earlier that the Pac-12 is going to be fun to watch, I'm not joking you. The Pac-12 is going to be a bar fight. If they don't get any teams into the college football playoff, it's likely because they're going to cannibalize themselves. So needless to say, it's going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen in the Pac-12. Now, that being said, the real popular pick is going to be USC. And listen, got to give USC their flowers. They are a very good football team. My thing is they could regress to the mean. Like, yes, their defense can very well be better, but they led the country in turnover differential last year. Do they go back to earth a little bit on that? That's the concern that I have. And generally the defense. Now, Lincoln Riley did make changes to his defensive staff to try to remedy those issues, but that historically has held Lincoln Riley back from winning a college football game, winning a national championship. He's traditionally not had very strong defenses, just historically speaking. Offensively, I don't think anyone's questioning his offensive intelligence. He's had multiple Heisman Trophy winners, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and now at USC, Caleb Williams. So that's all we know. That's certainly all we know. Oregon State could be a dark horse as well. Oregon State had double-digit wins for the first time in a New York minute. And Oregon State just brought in former 5-star DJU. Didn't quite work out the way that they wanted to at Clemson. But he's there at Oregon State. He's going to be better than who they had at quarterback. And that's not to mention some of the other contenders in this conference. Oregon's got Bo Nix. Utah has been a very good team the past few years as well. UCLA, they have I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now, but he's a 4-star true freshman. He's going to be fun to watch as well. And also we have, who else do we have? It's on the tip of my tongue. USC, pretty sure I talked about them, but one team that I'm really watching here, and this is going to rub some people the wrong way now. I think the Washington Huskies are going to win the Pac-12. Now, I'm going to let you be upset. I'm going to let you start getting ready to type something in the comments section, letting me know that, but Jake, Caleb Williams is certified him. He's a dog. He's a Heisman Trophy winner. How could you pick against him to win the Pac-12? Told you it was not going to be easy, but what if I told you Washington went 11-2 last year? They beat Texas in their bowl game. And they did all this without having anybody drafted in the NFL in the 2023 NFL draft. They had 0 pros drafted in rounds 1 through 7. Did not happen. You want to know how insane that is? Even Northwestern, all of the crap that's happening at Northwestern right now, they did not win a single game in the continental United States. They went 1-11 because their only win was against Nebraska, also in Dublin, Ireland. They had 4 NFL guys drafted in the 2023 NFL draft, most notably Peter Skoronski, who was the 11th overall pick. Washington brings a pretty strong core back from their team, most notably Michael Penix Jr. And Michael Penix Jr. was somebody that played extremely well at Indiana in the 2020 season, in that COVID season, actually got Indiana ranked. Now, think about that. Indiana was ranked in the 2020 season, and then he tore his ACL. Wasn't necessarily the same in 2021. He goes and transfers to Washington. He transferred to Washington, and he played really well in 2022. He's back in that same offense, same environment. They got their core back. Now, that being said, I talked about the 6 teams with 8.5 wins or more. They play 4 of the 5 other teams in conference play. They do play 9 conference games out there in the Pac-12. Most notably, it starts on October 14th. Listen to this stretch. Home versus Oregon, home versus Arizona State. They then go on the road 2 times in a row at Stanford, at USC. Then they are at home versus Utah, and then they go on the road versus Oregon State. That is going to be a brutal 6-game stretch for Washington. But they're going to need to go 5-1 if they want to go to the conference championship game, because like the ACC, doesn't matter which division you are from. You just have to be the 2 best teams in the conference, and you will go to the Pac-12 conference championship game. So, all things considered, I think Washington they may not have the best quarterback in the country. They don't have Caleb Williams. But if you want to talk about the most complete team in the Pac-12, in my opinion, give me the Washington Huskies, man. Give me Washington. I will pound my table for the Huskies. I think they can very well win the Pac-12 this year. And I would put money on them too, which, for those of you that are betting degenerates, I'm going to show you guys the bet slip. If you chose my predictions, what you're looking at in terms of what kind of payout you can get. So make sure you stay tuned for that. So that leaves the final conference, the SEC. Now, we saw Georgia. They're the 2-time defending national champions. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to pick Georgia to win the SEC again. But before we do that, a few things that we do need to consider. Georgia, first and foremost, they are replacing their quarterback. They lost a good portion of their defense from the last couple of seasons to both the transfer portal and the NFL draft. A lot of pros drafted from Georgia. Stetson Bennett, not there anymore. But not only that, historically speaking, you want to guys know the last time that we saw a three-peat in high-end Division I football at the FBS level? I'll give you guys a minute to take a guess. It's not who you think it's going to be. I promise you, it's going to be good. The Minnesota Golden Gophers was the last team to pull off a three-peat into major Division I college football. This was from 1934 to 1936. That was during the Great Depression, the last time that we saw a three-peat in college football. Now, I said it before, I'll say it again, just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't happen. And Georgia is still going to be capable of winning a national championship. I would not be surprised if Georgia goes undefeated in the regular season and they end up going to Atlanta. But not only is history not going to be on their side, not only did they lose quite a bit in the transfer portal to the NFL draft, but I have some concerns about the culture at Georgia. I think it's starting to there might be some distractions that might prevent them from reaching that ultimate goal. Now, the Atlantic Journal-Chronicle probably has overblown it with the sexual assault allegations in terms of Georgia, the coaching staff rallies around their players accused of sexual assault. And I don't have to tell you guys that sexual assault obviously should be taken very seriously, regardless of whether it's done to a man, woman, or child. But I also do believe in, being innocent until proven guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt. And the AJC, they, let's say the examples that they give was on the sketchy side. They have been thrown to the fire by various other college football shows. And Georgia, even before the SEC Media Days, it's getting ready to go right now. We are witnessing the SEC Media Days going in place as we are in the process of the SEC Media Days. They released a 9-page report asking the AJC to retract that article because not a lot of substance to it. There's a headline. Some people that want to see Georgia's downfall. ran away with it. I'll be the first to recognize that. So, but that being said, the racing at Georgia, I think we're starting to see some cracks. We're starting to see some culture issues with the younger guys that did not play much the past couple of years that will be expected to contribute heavily for that Georgia football team. So I look over to the West, therefore, in terms of who I think could win the SEC this year. I'm looking at there's Alabama. Alabama is certainly a very popular choice, but here's the thing with Alabama. We don't know who's going to be the starting quarterback for Alabama, and so much so they actually went to the transfer portal to get the quarterback out of Notre Dame, Tyler Buchner. He followed as an offensive coordinator to Alabama. But I don't know if Tyler Buchner's that dude. We seen him play sparingly in 2021 as well as 2022. In 2021, he threw for 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And in 2022, before he got hurt, he threw 3 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. So actually more interceptions than touchdowns. I'm not great at math, but that's not good. That is certainly not good at all. He was starting the game that Notre Dame lost to Marshall. That's really all that you need to know. As we're actually going to take a quick break here real quick. As my dog is going to have to go outside for a quick moment. So we'll be right back to try to finish up that point. But just know that Tyler Buchner isn't necessarily that guy. All right, so we're back from that. Sometimes due to calls with the dogs, being a dog lover myself, obviously, but yeah, to get back to what I was saying, I don't think Tyler Buchner's that guy. And granted, I don't think Alabama would need whoever ends up starting at the quarterback position because it's not a shoo-in for Tyler Buchner to start. He might not win the job. They have not named a quarterback as of the recording of this video. But, Alabama does have plenty of talent on the offensive side of the ball. We know this. Defense should be a little bit better, but I am worried about Alabama if they get into high-scoring games. Can their offense keep up? Can the quarterback make enough plays to win them the game? And that's a big question mark for me personally. They'll still be really good. I think the floor for this Alabama team is 10-2 of them losing to Texas and them losing to the team who I really do think could very well win the SEC, LSU. I think this is LSU's time to shine. They overexceeded expectations in year number 1. Brian Kelly's in his first year at LSU ends up going 10-4. They went to Atlanta, lost in Atlanta to Georgia, but they went to Atlanta, and then they end up winning their bowl game to get to their 10th win. And the teams that they also lost to, they lost to Florida State, but Florida State turned out to be a very good team as well. Schedule for LSU is going to be tough. It's not going to be easy to navigate. Just looking at this schedule, not going to read through the whole thing. Florida State, that first game of the season is September 3rd. That's going to really tell what type of season LSU could have, if they could have college football aspirations, or is it going to be a tough road for them to get into the playoff, basically having the win out. That's going to be a really big deal early on in the season. Going to more intriguing week 1 games. And then looking for the rest of the schedule, got Arkansas on September 23rd, but that's at home. Ole Miss on the road September 30th. Auburn should be better, but they will also be at home October 14th. They will have a little bit of break. They're hosting Army, but biggest game of the season from an SEC standpoint, that Alabama game. Can they beat Alabama 2 years in a row? Can Jalen Daniels, who was pretty good last year, should be better, comes back with some experience, and I have a absolute crush on teams that have experienced starting quarterbacks, especially starting quarterbacks that are at the very least above average. That Alabama game, it's going to be electric in Bryant-Denny Stadium. We don't see it as hostile very often because, Alabama has always assumed that they're going to win and take you off the field. That Texas game for Alabama is going to be rocking. This LSU game, same thing. First weekend in November as well. That's going to be electric. But if they can get past Alabama, they finish out with Florida. Florida is still rebuilding. And then they have Texas A&M, which who knows what Texas A&M is going to be like November 25th. They might be the wild card as well. But this year, with the amount of talent that LSU has acquired, LSU's did a pretty good job in transfer portal as well. They finished with the number 6 recruiting class, so they added a serious amount of talent too. I think as LSU, I think this is their year. I think that this is their year, that they are going to do it, that LSU, they will play Georgia in Atlanta for the conference championship, and they will go ahead and they will beat the Georgia Bulldogs, possibly going to the college football playoff. A lot of it's going to hinge on that Florida State game. They won't be out of it, but at the same time, that doesn't help their chances if, for whatever reason, they do not end up handling their business, right? So I talked about the ACC. I talked about the Big Ten. I even went in, talked about the Big 12 as well. And then we rounded out talking about the Pac-12 and the SEC, who I think is going to win those conference championships. So let's say you want to be a gambling degenerate. I posted a bet slip. So let's say you post a $10 bet on Florida State winning the ACC, Michigan win the Big 10, Texas win the Big 12, Washington win the Pac-12, and LSU winning the SEC. You're looking at a $10 bet, possibly winning you close to $4,000. That's what it would potentially look like if you end up rolling with that and hitting on that. So take what you will with that, but I just wanted to throw that out there since I know some of you may partake in the betting. But guys, that is going to wrap things up here for the first ever Any Given Saturday college football podcast. I really do hope you guys enjoyed it, and it would really help me out tremendously if you smash that like button for me, because that will help get this out to more college football fans like yourself. Also, hit that subscribe button for me if you do happen to be brand new to the channel. Would love to grow this community. Would love to get to at least 100 subs before college football season start. I would love to see us try and do that and get to possibly 1,000 subs before the end of college football season. I think we can do that here. Just gotta tell your friends about it, man. Tell your favorite dog sitter. Tell your uncle that is passionate about college sports. Let them know that we're here, and we're gonna make some waves. That's what we're hoping for. And also, let me know down in the comments with any general feedback with this being the very first college football podcast. I was going to have a webcam for this one, but we're having some webcam issues, so no webcam today, but I will have a webcam in the future, as well as any questions that you want me to give my opinion on. I'm always welcome to that. The top 3 or 4 questions that I see in the comment section, I will answer in a future podcast. Might not be the next one, but it will be a future one. So yeah, man, thank you guys so much again. This is your host, Jake, and we are going to be signing off. Until next time, take care, y'all.